Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, and today we have three guests. We have the Superintendent of Schools, Mary Bowen Egebraten.
Hi, Jamie.
And school board members and President Tom Holland, and Brian Bell. And Brian, do you have an office on the school board?
Just a member.
Just a member, okay. Well, today we're here because here in Hudson, and as they say, all politics is local. People that are avid watchers of our show know that we do government politics, and if all politics are local, I think there's nothing more local than our school district and our schools. In fact, our viewers that have watched previous shows know that we've talked about referendums, we've talked about space issues, we've talked about initiatives like the 2025 initiative. So today we're talking about rezoning, and I think it was a show that we did about 7 months ago about secondary space needs, and then there was a referendum in April. So we're kind of bringing the viewers up to speed, but those that are in Hudson anyway know that we had a vote, and I think the percentages broke down, what, 56-44, something in that range, in favor of making what is now the St. Croix Meadows property it's referred to, but it's basically the defunct dog track that's been not used or vacant since for, what, a good 10 years? 2001, so that's now going on 11 plus years. A school, and that school may be a high school, it may be a junior high school, whatever, but it's going to address their secondary space needs. So to back up a little bit, because one, we need to explain, why are we here talking about it? If the referendum has already passed, why are we talking about it? But secondly, what is, what's the research? Because there were questions raised, and maybe let's deal with that. Why are we still talking about the rezoning? What has been the process that you went through as the leader for the school district? I'm speaking specifically to the school board regarding addressing secondary space needs.
Maybe I'll just kind of start out. We can just, jump in anywhere. But, in anticipation that the possibility that the referendum could pass, we knew that we needed to approach the city, anticipating that the property would have to be rezoned if the referendum passed. So we approached them, I believe, in February of this year, and discussed the possibilities of this property being passed by a referendum from the community for a secondary solution, as you said. The city had decided not to make a decision about that at that point in time, but decided that they would eventually wait until after the referendum determination was made, and then they would decide then at that point in time. So
and you mentioned the they, Tom, and I just want to be clear to our viewers, because when we're talking about rezoning the property, St. Croix Meadows, which comprises of a total of, what, 120,
130 acres, about 90 is usable. 90
of the 130 is usable. Okay, but it's currently zoned a special use commercial, as I understand it. It was at one time a recreational commercial because it was a dog track, and a couple years ago a different designation was given, and some things were done with the tax assessments and so forth. But essentially it can be used for commercial and would need some kind of rezoning change. Even if it was light industrial, that would require a change to the comprehensive plan, because the City of Hudson has a plan where things can go. Certain sections of the town are designated residential. There's even public designation where our current schools are located, and where the county government center is public designation. And that public designation carries some connotations, because then there generally is not tax dollars being generated when a public entity owns it.
Right.
And so that's kind of where I think the controversy maybe is behind a lot of this, is the perception that we're increasing the size of the public zone property and decreasing the size of available commercial property. And so that's requires a rezoning request, because while the school board could go ahead and just buy the property, it's a matter of putting a building on there, which requires the city approval. Maybe this is a question, some of the questions I ask are kind of obvious ones, but I'm trying to give the viewers the background and be as objective as possible here. Why did the school district just not go ahead, buy the property, close on the deal, and then approach the city with the rezoning? Why was that made a part, or is that part of secret negotiations with the with the buyer or the seller rather, that you know, that was in there? I don't know if the seller wanted that contingency in there or the school district did, but
Right. No, I think that we had made when we went to the community to talk about this referendum and to get their support of it, you know, I think that we were clear to them that we wanted to do this in a proper way. And we believe that the proper way was to have this purchase agreement be contingent upon rezoning. And so, and the reason for that is that, for example, if we went ahead, as you said, go ahead and purchase the property, and without it being rezoned, there's no guarantee that it will be then rezoned. And so there's a risk that we take to have property in our possession again that's virtually unusable for purposes of a school district. So for that reason, I think, you know, I think we need to do things in proper order and not get ahead of ourselves.
So the school district didn't want to dictate to the city, you know, what it was doing with property within the city limits, and wait on closing on the purchase.
I think that's fair to say, that we don't want to put undue pressure on the city in that regard either necessarily. I mean, I think there's just a proper way to do this, and we understand the consequences of getting property and acquiring property that becomes unusable with no necessary guarantee that it could be used.
And I think a fair statement for the Planning Commission would be, you know, when they were first approached in February, that maybe they didn't want to set a precedent of granting conditional rezonings after the referendum. They wanted to see what the public's reaction would this be
Sure.
to this would be, because if the referendum had failed, then of course the rezoning would not have gone through,
Right.
or would not have been necessary.
Exactly.
Correct?
That's correct.
So, okay, so now we're up to February, and then April, the vote's taken, and there was I think quite a bit of information out there for voters as far as there was lots of reasons to vote no to the referendum. People that thought, why do we need to purchase any property? Why don't we just add a second story to the high school? And we could go through all the reasons. Why don't we just build out on UU? Or,
Right.
you know, there's lots of reasons to have voted no, but despite all those different reasons, the no people didn't get more than 44%. And so now we're at the position where it did pass, and what was the very next meeting after the referendum, the Planning Commission was then again approached about the rezoning. So again, why are we here? Why wasn't it just voted on that night?
Somebody else want to jump
Yeah.
in?
Mary, you want to have
Sure. There first was a hearing before the city council, and that was right after the vote. Then that same week, we went before the Plan Commission, and they had a number of questions. And we wanted to take the time to answer those questions and do the due diligence and show them that we had done the due diligence to answer the questions that they had, so that they could make an informed choice.
And some of their questions, like the primary one was, they wanted an apples-to-apples comparison of several parcels of where they thought would be potential sites, two of which were in the city limits, Carmichael and Vine, which is a property that's not currently on the market, correct?
Carmichael and Vine.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes.
Is in the city
Next
limits.
to the government center.
And then St. Croix Meadows, and then two that are not in the city limits, which would be
Right.
UU, which is currently owned by the school district,
Correct.
and a property that's, as I understand, is not on the market, but is located even further south of town than what the dog tracks
That's
location
correct.
is.
That's right on
yeah.
F. Mhm.
So obviously, some of these properties, particularly the one that's south of the dog track, would have been not something that you had investigated prior to this Planning Commission meeting, correct?
Well, we actually talked about it with the Board of Education, but that was a brief conversation because it wasn't on the market.
And let's talk about those talks about the school board, because there are people that say, well, the school district has tunnel vision and they locked in on this school, the St. Croix Meadows property. The actual search for property began when? And what year would you say?
I would say that it was at least a 2-year process, dating back from this current year. So that would put it at about 2010 or so. I mean, in the process of meetings with the Facilities and Grounds Committee, we've been looking at this. You know, it's no secret that there are capacity issues in this district, have been for many years, dating back.
Well, there was a task
2010.
force in 2003, right?
That's correct.
And
That's
that
right.
was, which was after a referendum to build a building out at the UU property did not get passed, and so
That's
a
right.
task force was formed, and several recommendations came out of there, one of which was we need an elementary school, and that was seen at that time, when I say at that time, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or is it now longer?
It opened in 2008.
So it opened in 2008, and our referendum must have been in '06, '07?
That's correct.
So that was the
2006.
first referendum to build the elementary school, and this was at a location which just happens to be to the immediate south of the dog track location.
That's correct.
And it's
That's
right across the street from Camp St. Croix.
That's right.
So those folks that may not familiar with
Yeah.
all our schools are, but that eased our overcrowding problem in the elementary schools, didn't alleviate anything in the middle school.
Right.
But in fact, now the middle school's kind of leaked into one of our elementary schools and
Right.
borrowed a few classrooms. And you have done, I think a very good job, but I think most people saying that, why wasn't this acted on 5 years ago? You've been doing some short-term approaches
Yeah.
in anticipation of something that
Yeah,
more
we've-
longer term being done.
We've been working at it based on a continuum, based on what we believed were the most important needs, initially or to begin with. And so that was the elementary school. But there was also a recession that came through this process as well. And from '08 till, and some would say we're still in it. But that delayed some things as well. And we have done some things to try to alleviate some of that pressure on a short-term basis.
You moved this school administration out of the high school.
Right.
We
And
did.
that created a few classrooms and
That's right.
and extended the life, so to speak, of being under the full capacity. And we already mentioned the fact that you're using classrooms in Hudson Prairie Elementary for
That's right, and
middle
it did
school.
some expansion, some short-term expansion, which we believe will fit into a long-term plan at the middle school as well.
Well, having been one of the citizens that was at that planning commission, citizen of the school district at that planning commission meeting, and I think almost to a person, every commission member said that they see the need for a school.
Yeah.
In fact, they said that's not even the question of whether we need a school, it's just a question of where it's going to be and,
Right.
and so forth. And I know that the school district has certain parameters for where they want to build a school, but this notion of St. Croix Meadows being used would preserve, if you will, the thought that one day we'd have a united, maybe campus where we have our sports facilities in one location with a school that has an auditorium that can accommodate perhaps
Right.
all the students rather than parts
Right.
of them at a time like we currently have. And if we don't use a campus of sufficient size to do that, we're going to have to look at other alternatives, I suppose.
That's right. Yeah, and that site at St. Croix Meadows gives us that kind of flexibility in those options. It's yet to be determined exactly what it would look like or how or what we would do and what kind of program we would put into that.
Well, to be honest with you, and I've talked to a lot of people who have, been both leaders and voters in this community for a while, and they said, why didn't the school present the voters with a cost for a building? Why are they waiting on that part of it? Why didn't you say, let's buy the property, and by the way, here's the building we're going to plunk down on this property?
Maybe I'll address that
Go
one.
right ahead.
You're doing a great job. So you can see the amount of deliberation just on this land purchase, and I just think it's, I think we have to get through. These are almost two conversations about. You can see there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of interest in where the school goes. So I think we need to kind of have deliberation on that and make sure that we're comfortable as a community on what we do there. And then the second is, what type of schools. There's really a couple different options there. And the Facilities Task Force, which I was a member of, that was my first move to Hudson.
That predated your being on the school board
Right,
itself.
yeah, it was my start of my career serving the Hudson School District. But we came up with building elementary schools. We had a lot. That was like you mentioned, Jamie. That was the first recommendation. And then the second one was build a secondary school. And there was actually a couple of options that kind of made the finals. And and one was a 3-year school, one was a 4-year school. And I just think, and there was another option of a 2-year school, right? So I think the option is to kind of bring back those 3 options and kind of do another discussion with the community.
Sure.
Because both would work. long term, bigger school sometimes will save some money in the long term versus adding on to a smaller school. But it's certainly an option to do that, and defraying some costs to a.
Well, what you have for space issues is almost a full grade in the middle school and a full grade in the high school.
Yeah.
Taking those out, that would alleviate in the short term.
Right. But we want to, I think, I personally, I think we have a lot of support in the community. This is taking a lot of energy as we think through this, and there's a lot of other things that we need to be focused on in our schools, in terms of curriculum and moving the curriculum forward and offering more AP classes, better serving those students with special needs. There's a lot of changes coming down with federal mandates. There's a lot of other things that I personally, as a school board member, are very concerned about. And I just think it's important that we make the right decision here to move forward with there's almost an acceptance that we do need a better secondary space option, but we really need to kind of get moving on this. And
so the idea of the purchase going up on the referendum
Right.
first, which passed, is the fact that you didn't want to put the cart before the horse and
Right.
spending the money, the taxpayer dollars, on designing a building that may not even get built because you can't purchase the property.
Right. Yeah. I want to be clear. We came back to why this space, and I just maybe it's important just to kind of go through it one more time. Is that when we're looking at space, we're looking at the cost per usable acre, right? We're looking at transportation. How do we get a lot of students there, right? We're looking at other things like the suitability to have the programs that I think the Hudson community wants, and those are all kind of factors. Then also other things like is the utilities already there, and that all goes back into the costs. So it's really the cost of transportation, and can we get the programs that really Hudson wants in their school. And when you go through each site, and we've not only looked at these three other sites that the Planning Commission has, we looked at many other sites.
That's right.
And we've done a thorough analysis. We were happy to kind of go through it again with the Planning Commission, and so in the result, it's a pretty resounding kind of answer that there's a pretty significant cost savings with this school to the tune of maybe $4 to $7 million more cost effective than the other sites. Transportation is 4 or 5 ways to the school versus Carmichael and Vine and some other considerations. And finally, it's enough space that gives us options to have the programs we want in Hudson. And so
going back to that first one, when you say $4 to $7 million in savings, that's all things being equal, assuming the same building being built on each of these properties.
That's just saying we have a piece of land. What is the cost per acre, right? Of basically. Of a site that's ready for a building, right? So that would be having sewer and water into the site. That would be doing the site preparation in terms of building a flat space to put a school and the parking and the athletic fields. That's the cost of any kind of road improvements that have to be done. These are estimates, but when you put that all together, it's a pretty clear answer. Economically, what the best answer is. Because there is a certain, for that school, there is a certain cost of, part of it would have to be some demolition to part of that facility. But there's a lot on that site in St. Carmentos that really defrays a lot of future expenses, and also there's already utilities into that site. So
I'm throwing up here the roadblocks or stumbling blocks that I've heard, and one of them too is the mold. That was a big rumor that just about 10 days before the referendum gained a lot of speed out there. It's fizzled a little bit, but maybe it's worth mentioning again people have asked why the school board members even viewed the site.
I can address that.
Okay.
And then we'll let
go ahead.
one of the other esteemed colleagues jump in. So it's important to think about this. This is not a building that we're going to put some paint and carpet in. This is basically the benefit of this site is that there's utilities that have come in, which are it's a lot of money to bring utilities into a site. It's already prepared, and we have a structure. We have concrete and steel beams that we can reuse. Right? There's a structure. There's a shell. But everything that's porous, the carpets, the sheetrock, that's all going to have to be done in an environmentally sound manner. But that's all parts of the building that we're not going to reuse.
So that net savings that you mentioned earlier, that's already taken into account, that all that stuff that could possibly have mold on it, even
Yes,
as
that's
people
all
have said.
part of. That's all part of the. That's all been factored in, and there's a report that's probably available. Will be available, Mary, right, to the that what we'll share with the Planning Commission next week.
Yes, it's online.
It's online
On
right
the
now.
district website.
I know
That
that
goes
there
into
was a
some
period
detail.
where the Planning Commission was to be given an opportunity to review it before it went totally public, and now we're sitting here as of October or August 30th, and they are. It is a link that people can. Where do they go to see that, Mary?
They just go to the district website at hudson.k12.wi.us, and it's right on our front page.
All right, and so in this report that's going to be already been presented to the Planning Commission, and the hope is that they will read it. If they have questions, there's going to be people there can answer those questions that assisted in preparing the report. But from your perspective, obviously you've lived with this issue much longer than the average taxpayer has, but what's your thoughts on that report? Are there any surprises in there from your standpoint, or more validation from some of the thoughts that had already previously been expressed?
I guess I was, I felt that the report would indicate that this was the best site. It was educational for me, I'd say, though, in terms of some of the factors that they take into consideration that, I'm not an expert in. And so that it was a learning for me. For example, that the traffic counts, when addressing the question, is it a good site? Is the St. Croix Meadow site a good site for retail? The traffic count there is 3,400 cars per day. And I read that and I thought, wow, that's pretty good. Then it went on to say in the report that the traffic count near the 94 is 35,000 cars per day. And
10 times as much.
Yeah, as much. And so it began to become clear to me through reading the report that you could see where somebody that's looking at a marketable location for their retail business would want it to be obviously closer to the 94 site.
And I'm sorry, I don't have the report in front of me. I don't know if either of you recall, what's the traffic count, say, at Carmichael and Vine? It's an intersection I'm very familiar with because I live near there and I go to the YMCA all the time.
Yeah.
And it's extremely crowded at the time when school is on, and when it will be next week when school starts.
Right.
Well, that's the exact number. I think it may be around 16,000. We can. Mary's
Close.
checking
I'll
right
see
now.
if I can
All right.
find it.
And then the other thing, besides the commercial value, is also like light industrial, warehousing, and things like that. Is like unlike some of the other industrial areas we have in Hudson, is that because of the traffic around Carmichael and 94. There's a lot of other land available in western Wisconsin, also out in Minnesota, that has closer to major transportation. So it really flushes out a couple of the factors around both the industrial and light commercial and light industrial and commercial in the report.
Well, that's getting to the best uses of the property, which I see as kind of the Planning Commission's. That's their purview, is to figure out what are the best uses for various areas of our city. And it seems to make sense that demand dictates where maybe commercial goes. Is commercial properties are more valuable if they're where the high traffic counts. I would think Hudson, Carmichael, and Vine would be, for a commercial property, would be much more desirable. Did you find that traffic count?
I did not. I
Okay.
didn't find it that.
But I
quickly.
think your number is right. I know it's a very high count for a property that right now doesn't have a lot of commercial development already, but it gets extremely heavy at certain parts of the day. And that was one of the other considerations, in addition to bringing utilities to a property. You've got other infrastructure and traffic issues that the Carmichael and Vine property, which was suggested by at least one Planning Commission member as an alternative site for the high school. Why wouldn't you want to put a school there which would be nice and handy for the middle school and so much closer to the high school than the dog track?
I just did find the traffic counts.
Okay.
Sorry. You gave me an idea where to look that I hadn't looked yet. Carmichael and Vine, about 15,500.
So your 16,000 estimate was almost right on.
So to answer the question, why not put it there? It kind of goes back to my point around why St. Croix Meadows may be, what we think is clearly the best choice for the taxpayers, is that it gets, you look at really those three factors again. you look at the cost, you look at the transportation, and our ability to kind of execute a program that is really where Hudson wants to be. And so the transportation issue specifically is a real challenge in that site. Mm-hmm. There's not that many ways to get to that site, and that Carmichael and that Vine Street corridor is a real challenge already. And even if you do some improvements in the road, it's still a real bottleneck. Mm-hmm.
Well, I heard that the infrastructure at the dog track can handle like up to 4,000 cars.
It was built for that, and then there's just and the report has the different bus routes. We our friends at Safeway put together they did some planning on what are the bus routes to these different sites. They did a pretty thorough analysis, and it was interesting to see the number of ways to get to the St. Croix Meadows versus either the UU property or the government center property.
And they thought it would reduce the congestion on Carmichael and Vine.
Yeah. Now, what do you say to those? It's maybe a small fraction of people, but still those people quite vocal that you're looking at all these other sites. There's already a high school, and there's green land that we see kids running on all the time, practice football field or whatever. Why aren't we just adding on to the current high school?
I'll trust that one because that came up many times, even back in 2004.
Whether it's add on another single story or go up.
Yeah, that was.
Story.
There's a lot of options, and it's good to keep having to talk about this because just kind of new people getting into the people that may have not been as read through the reports back several years ago. But we've reviewed those options, and there's and really that becomes you don't have enough core space, the hallways. Eventually you can add on, but you can't add on anymore. The cafeteria is too small, the hallways are too small, so you end up getting a building that doesn't even work, and because you just have more and more students going into the same kind of central areas. And I just think it's important that we've explored many options, and I think it's time for our Hudson community to it's time for us to move forward, and because education is very important to our community. We hear it all the time.
Yes, that was another thing that the Plan Commission, they like our schools. We've got a great reputation in this town for our education system. They just want to be convinced that this is the right place. And the Planning Commission members concerned, I had heard them raise the issue of tax revenues. Now, whether that's the Planning Commission per se or the City Council's issue, because they are the ultimate ones on the budget, what do you say to those folks as far as with the loss of tax revenue, which I think is currently about $25,000 that St. Croix Meadows current owners pay a year? That's $25,000 that comes out of the city budget. How could that be recouped by the city?
So first of all, to recoup that, we have to keep a healthy community is a growing community, and for a growing community, the number one thing that people look at is the quality of education. They go look online, they see the graduation rates, they see how many AP courses. They may have a special needs child, and they look at the services provided to them.
ACT scores.
ACT scores. Then, when they're with their realtor, what do? Drive me by the high school. Drive me by the elementary schools, right? And that's so important to our community. And I can talk about there's communities that don't invest as much as they need to in their education, and that's just that Hudson. We won't get there. We need, we have a community that supports education, but it's so great schools with great facilities attract more families. Attracting more families helps basically build a bigger tax base, and that's how healthy communities move forward. The $25,000 for this site, yes, that's relevant. I don't want to minimize that, but I think the bigger picture is having a thriving community like we do right now.
So Brian's addressing it, the question regarding replacing $25,000 from a potential productive side, from a side of being able to stay vibrant as a community, continue to build a tax base that could then replace that $25,000. a loss in taxes. You know, there are other things, and there's actually two questions I think regarding this issue. One is the loss of a current $25,000 tax revenue to the city from that particular property. The other one is its long-term potential. That's also another question that the city and the Planning Commission have asked about as well. So we want to work with our community. We want to work with, obviously, the city on this with them. And part of that is, and part of a discussion that we've had is to take some of that property, the 130 acres that we're looking at, 90 of which is usable, and carve out an area where it's possible that the city could then purchase and develop if they still believe that that's good developable land for marketing or retail or whatever it might be. That's
So the school district doesn't need necessarily all 90 acres for
We looked
a
at that,
secondary
yep,
site.
yep.
And you think that, what are we talking, 10, 12, 15 acres?
Yeah, in
That could still go
vicinity.
back
that
to
vicinity,
commercial?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just, we're looking for ways to partner, and this could be good for everyone because the school will drive more traffic counts, so that parcel becomes much more valuable now because of the increase in traffic. So I think there's ways that that we can partner and make this a big success for all the stakeholders.
Well, I don't want to leave anything out, but I think that kind of, well, the other issue was the commercial property that's currently zoned. I mean, city plans change over time, and Hudson's, I've reviewed the last 3, and they've, a spectacular change. I mean, the corporate city limits of Hudson have doubled in less than the last 20 years. So you may take a snapshot now of what there would be in available commercial property that may not be true again in another 5 or even 6 years, as I understand the city planning process. I don't know, is that going to be addressed in this report?
It'll be in the report, and I can't speak to it in detail, but the summary is that, in their opinion, there's adequate land, developable land, that is good for, was it
11 to
17 years
at the medium growth rate.
That's even what's already in the city limits. That's not counting, is that counting the extraterritorial, they call extraterritorial, but land that would be adjacent to the city limits?
Our consultants will be there on Thursday, and we hope people will come if they're interested.
That's again, ask the experts,
Yes,
right?
yes, and I think that, they have done that part of the report. I believe some of it may be included,
And then some of
but
it's just
not all of
available
it.
land, but using, like you talked about, if you looked at, so I think that, that's something that we can, drill into a little more with the experts.
And it doesn't include St. Croix Meadows.
Does not include St. Croix.
Right.
So even if that was taken off the
Adequate,
books and
Yeah, that's
not
the
counting
point.
the 12 or 15 acres that might be able to go back, be carved
Right,
back to
right.
commercial, the point being that Hudson is not totally waterlocked at this point. I mean, he's got water on one border, but Hudson has, and to the north it is, but we've still got 2 directions we can go. We can go east and we can go south, and that's the direction that Hudson has grown when it's doubled its size in the last 20 years.
And that's the report that'll come forward, and I think we'll have the opportunity to ask more questions about that and understand that better.
What's the time frame? Just assuming that after examining all the factors, and again, to give the folks the procedure, the Planning Commission takes a vote. It's really a non-binding vote, but it's a recommendation for the City Council to consider the rezoning request being made by the current owner, SCM, and the school district.
Supported by the district, certainly.
But if the city were to have, and I believe it needs 4 votes out of the 6 city council members to vote in favor of it, if that rezoning were to be approved, what kind of a timetable are we looking at? Because you had mentioned about this community involvement, deciding what kind of school, and it has to be designed, and then you get a budget for what it's going to cost to build it. When are we thinking that the school could be put on that property?
Well, we've talked about the community engagement process taking about 6 months, because it's really important, as Brian and Tom have talked about, to gain from our community which solution is the best solution for this community and what should be on the site. So that's about 6 months. And then to build a school of this size, it's going to take about 3 years.
Okay. So we're talking about the fall of 2016 then, maybe?
That sounds about right.
Okay. Well, it's still a ways out, and you guys think that you can address these the space issues in the interim?
Well, we're going to have to. So we've been doing it so far, and with some creative thoughts and creative ideas. But you know, we just hope. We don't know what the growth is going to be over the next few years. We just know that it's been pretty robust in the last 20 years that I've been in this community. So.
Well, hopefully we'll have an answer in the next 3 weeks as to what direction, and then we didn't even get into teacher salaries, and maybe that's a subject for a future show.
Sounds like a good idea.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you again for
Thanks.
coming on our show.
Thanks.
And thank you, viewers, for listening to and watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, and thanks for watching.